Hello and welcome to the El Camino studio. Today we're on to part 2 of the coloring lesson number 1. We'll continue where we left off. For those new, we're working on page 1 of the Camino coloring book, the scene of Saint Jean Pied de Port. In the previous lesson, we were putting down light washes of yellow and brown on all the buildings and structures in the picture. The further along we get into this drawing, the more intricate and detailed the blending is going to be. Up until now, the yellow and brown was just a simple wash over the whole surface. Now we have to get down to some more of the details. So I'd like to spend some time before we start warming up and practicing a little bit of the blending. You can see how flat I hold the pencil, and the yellow and brown make more of a golden color brown, and that's what we want for a little bit of a contrast and offset to the bright yellow of the sunlight. It's always good to practice on a scrap piece of paper before we start and commit to the final drawing. What I did here is I made a little quickie sketch of a detail of part of the scene, the top corner of one of the buildings. And in that top corner we got the eaves trough, and we got the underhang, and we got a bit of the wall with the corner blocks. So you can see that I'm starting with the yellow, and I'm going to the brown, and I'm putting a light wash over this. Here we have to be a little bit more careful by staying in the lines. I know some people hate staying in the lines, but sometimes we have to. So we'll continue now with a darker brown to get the underhang a little bit darker, and underneath of the eaves trough, and a little bit on the blocks. Like we were doing in the first part of the lesson, we're going to work, still got to keep on working as light as possible. We can keep going over it again and over it again until we get the intensity that we want. But right now I would keep it nice and light. And always remember to sit back and have a look at it from a distance. And you can see the drawing emerging out of that. And you'll see where you're overworking, underworking. So it's always important to sit back and look at it. There's no rush to get this done. It's a very mindful and meditative process. For a number of years, one of the habits I've been trying to encourage in myself is to, during breakfast and in the morning coffee, to sit and just do a quickie sketch of anything that came into my mind at the time, or to do a little bit of coloring on a project like this. This is perfect in the morning with your coffee, or you can look out the window and you can just relax, and it's a great way to start your day by doing some mindfulness before the rat race and the hectic existence begins. By working as soft as we are, we're keeping that transparency, and a lot of the white is still coming through. It's starting to look good because you can see the richness of the colors coming out, and it's very pleasing to the eye. When I teach my students in classroom settings, I always encourage them to keep all their artwork. Just put it in a binder or a box and just keep them all and never throw them out. Because you can always go back and see how you got to a certain point in a drawing. Just by looking at the drawing, you can't really remember. I forget sometimes how I arrived at a certain effect or a certain color. So just keep everything, and sometimes it's irreplaceable. Especially in painting, you forget, how did I get that particular shade? And then you have a record of it, and you remember how to do it. In painting, I usually write beside it what I used and the mixtures. So far on this little detail, we've used 5 of the 24 colors. So now I'm doing a little detail of the area for the tree, where the trees are in the horizon. So we'll do a little work on the trees. They're farther away, so there's much less detail required for them. In most drawings we have a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. All the major details are in the foreground, and the most saturated colors are in the foreground. The middle ground gets reduced, and the background is has very little detail and a lot less intensity in the colors. So when it comes to doing trees, you don't have to get too detailed. You don't want to get too detailed. So just do the organic shapes. It's when you look at the horizon, the trees sort of look like green versions of popcorn. So just try to work with a lighter hand, and we're going to work with basically three colors to get this little tree area done. Okay, we're going to work with a light and a dark shade of green, and the dark brown, and we're going to finish it off with a little bit of the yellow. So we're slowly building a little body into the tree by leaving the tops of these little bits of popcorn nice and bright, and darkening it as we go to our imaginary shadows. So we're going to go through each pencil and create a little bit more body as we go along. When you walk the pilgrimage across Spain, you start off in the Pyrenees, which has its own landscape. Then you go through the Meseta, which is a long flat plain which is very arid. And then you finally get to Galicia, and that's more mountainous again and very lush. So over the course of this Camino, you see all kinds of different trees, from dense forest to eucalyptus trees to olive trees, and every variety of tree. So the further along we get into this Camino coloring book and different lessons, we'll spend more and more time on doing trees. This is a very simple drawing, so we don't have to, we won't be, there's no necessity for doing anything too extensive in the little corner that we're using. Right now I'm still working with the darker shade of green. You can see already how the trees are starting to take some shape just by using the two shades, the light and the dark. The higher the contrast between light and dark areas, the objects become more and more three-dimensional. So the higher you can make this contrast, the better it's going to look. So now I'm going to finish off the darker areas with the dark brown. I'm going to be very sparingly using the dark brown because you don't want to overwhelm the green. So just work from the edge of the light area towards the lighter area above. Now I'm just going to finish off the tops and give it just a bit of yellow to warm up the trees a little bit. If you just leave them white, it's just a little bit too just a little bit too cool. Okay, so now we're going to resume to where we left off on the first part of this lesson. We were working with the light brown and putting the light brown wash over all the areas that required a bit of darkening, like the shadows of the brick walls and a little bit on the awnings, and we're just going to slowly work our way across and see where we have to get a little more darkness. This old stone bridge in Saint Jean Pied de Port is probably one of the most photographed bridges along the way. But in the Camino, there's countless bridges of all sorts and descriptions. They have wooden bridges, they have stone bridges, and you name it, every variety of bridges. But I remember one, I'm not exactly sure where it was, but the pavement across the bridge was made out of field stones, and they were quite round. It was one of the hardest bridges to cross, because even no matter how hard your shoes are, you could feel this rough texture. I was ever so glad to get the other side of this bridge. But when I did reach the other side of the bridge, it was time for lunch. So we went to a little local cafe, and they just made the most wonderful food. It was absolutely amazing. I would have walked across that bridge 20 times for the meal I had at that place. It was just wonderful. I wish I could remember where it was though. It looks like we're almost getting to the end of the brown for this stage. We can always come back and do some more to it. But the buildings are getting quite three-dimensional, and it's beginning to look like what it's supposed to. So now we'll just finish up this and get on to the next color. Okay, the next color is green, and we've done our little practice exercise on the scrap piece of paper. So now we should feel a little bit more comfortable doing the trees. So we're going to go do a repeat of what we did in the little practice. So we're going to go start with the light green, then build some body with the darker green, then come back for the dark brown for the dense, dark, shady areas, and finish it up with a little touch of the yellow for the bright crowns of the trees. So this shouldn't take us long. We're also going to do the little bush that's under the bridge, and we're going to do the same thing with that. In the water, we also add just a little bit of green into the water for the reflection. And now that we're finished with the brown, we'll get on to the blue. We're going to use the blue to cool down the shady areas. If you remember your color theory in high school, that there are warm colors and cold colors. The warm colors are the yellows, the oranges, the reds, and you got cool colors like violets and blues, and you have warm and cool grays as well. So we're going to try to add a little coolness to the shadows in this picture. Because when we go out walking, we stand beside a bright, sunshiny building. It's very warm, and when we go into the shades, it cools off quite dramatically and quickly. So we have to somehow visualize this in our drawing, and we do that with our blues here. You can see how cool the shadows are becoming. It makes quite a bit of difference at the end in the drawing. So you just very, very sparingly use the blue for this. And at the same time, we can give a little more intensity to the water, and maybe a little bit to the sky. Because the water is a reflection of the sky, and normally it ends up being just a little bit darker than the sky itself. So you'll have to just remember when you're at a scene like this, and remember what the water looked like. If the water is very shallow, then you can add greens and browns and whatever the bottom of the water looks like. But overall, if you're standing at this particular angle, all you're really going to see is the reflection of the sky. So we've come to the end of part 2. I hope you watch part 3.